One of the greatest weaknesses hidden beneath the surface of a narcissistic woman is her deep and relentless need for control. Control is not simply a preference for her. It is a psychological necessity. It becomes the structure that protects the image she has carefully built about herself. To understand this, we must look beyond the surface confidence she often displays. What appears as strength is frequently a defense mechanism, a carefully constructed mask designed to hide an underlying fear of unpredictability. For the narcissistic personality, the world feels safe only when it can be managed. Relationships are not always experienced as mutual connections between two individuals, but as systems that must be directed. Conversations, emotional reactions, social dynamics, each becomes something to subtly influence. Each becomes something to subtly influence. When things move according to her expectations, the illusion of stability remains intact. She feels powerful, admired, and secure within the role she has created. But the moment that control begins to slip, something very different emerges. When someone stops reacting to her emotional provocations, when a partner refuses to play the expected role, or when admiration turns into indifference, the foundation beneath her carefully maintained identity begins to tremble. What follows is not calm reflection, but discomfort, sometimes even panic. The loss of control exposes something she works tirelessly to hide: uncertainty about her own value. This is why simple acts of independence from others can feel so threatening to her. A person setting boundaries, speaking calmly, without emotional reaction, or walking away from manipulation, removes the stage on which her influence operates. And without that stage, she is forced to confront a reality she has spent years avoiding: the possibility that her power over others was never as absolute as she believed. Psychologically speaking, control becomes a substitute for genuine inner security. Where self-awareness would bring stability, control attempts to manufacture it externally. Yet this strategy always carries a flaw, because people cannot truly be controlled forever. And this leads us to a profound realization. The moment you stop feeding the need for control, the illusion collapses. True strength, after all, does not come from controlling others. It comes from mastering oneself. Another hidden weakness often lies in the narcissistic woman's profound dependence on validation. At first glance, she may appear extraordinarily confident. She might speak with certainty, carry herself with poise, and project an image of someone who knows exactly who she is. Yet, if we look more closely, we begin to notice something important. Much of this confidence is sustained not from within, but from the reactions of others. Psychologically speaking, validation functions as a kind of emotional fuel. Compliments, admiration, attention, and even subtle signs of approval serve to reinforce the identity she has constructed. Each affirmation strengthens the image she wishes the world to see. In many ways, this external feedback becomes the mirror through which she recognizes herself. Without that mirror, the image begins to blur. This is why attention is not merely appreciated, it becomes necessary. When others praise her intelligence, beauty, influence, or uniqueness, it temporarily stabilizes the fragile structure of her self-worth. For a moment, the inner doubts quiet down. The admiration confirms the story she wants to believe about herself. But here lies the weakness. When a person depends too heavily on the opinions of others to maintain their identity, they become vulnerable to the withdrawal of that attention. Silence, indifference, or emotional distance can feel disproportionately painful. What might seem like a small shift to others can create a profound disturbance within her internal world. You may notice that when admiration decreases, the narcissistic personality often intensifies certain behaviors. She may seek attention more aggressively, provoke emotional reactions, or subtly manipulate situations in order to regain the spotlight. It is not simply a desire for praise. It is a psychological attempt to restore the structure that holds her sense of self together. From a deeper perspective, this dynamic reveals an important truth about human psychology. Genuine confidence is quiet because it does not depend on constant confirmation. It grows from self-knowledge, from the difficult work of understanding one's own strengths and limitations. When validation becomes the primary source of identity, the individual is always at the mercy of the audience. And an identity that requires constant applause is by its very nature fragile. True stability begins only when a person no longer needs the world to continually remind them who they are. Another revealing weakness appears in the way a narcissistic woman experiences rejection. For most people, rejection is unpleasant, but it is also part of the natural rhythm of human relationships. We learn from it, we adapt, and over time, we develop the emotional resilience necessary to face it without losing our sense of self. But for the narcissistic personality, rejection is not simply a moment of disappointment. It is experienced as a direct threat to identity. To understand this, we must recognize how carefully the narcissistic self-image is constructed. Much of her psychological energy is devoted to maintaining a narrative in which she is admired, desired, and superior in some meaningful way. This narrative becomes more than a belief. It becomes the foundation of her inner stability. When others reinforce that image, everything appears balanced and controlled. However, rejection disrupts that narrative. When someone walks away, sets firm boundaries, refuses to chase her approval, or simply stops participating in the emotional dynamic she expects, it creates a psychological shock. The rejection contradicts the story she has been telling herself about her place in the world. And when that story is challenged, the response is rarely calm acceptance. Instead, we often see defensive reactions. She may reinterpret the situation in a way that protects her ego, perhaps convincing herself that the other person is weak, jealous, or incapable of appreciating her value. In other cases, rejection may provoke anger, attempts to regain control, or subtle emotional punishments directed at the person who dared to withdraw. Yet these reactions reveal something deeper. They reveal how fragile an identity can become when it depends too heavily on admiration and influence. If one person's decision to step away can cause such emotional turbulence, then the foundation of that identity was never as stable as it appeared. From a psychological perspective, rejection is one of life's most powerful teachers. It forces us to confront the difference between who we believe we are and how we actually relate to others. Those who possess inner strength eventually use rejection as an opportunity for growth and reflection. But when rejection must always be denied, reinterpreted, or attacked, the opportunity for growth disappears. and the deeper truth becomes unavoidable. The person who cannot face rejection remains forever dependent on the approval they cannot control. There is another aspect that often surprises people when they begin to understand the psychology of narcissism, and that is the fragile nature of the narcissistic self. From the outside, a narcissistic woman may appear exceptionally confident, even untouchable. She may speak with certainty, defend her opinions fiercely, and present herself as someone who cannot easily be shaken. But when we examine this more carefully, we often discover that the confidence being displayed is not as solid as it seems. In many cases, what looks like strength is actually a protective structure built around a very sensitive core. Built around a very sensitive core. The narcissistic personality invests enormous energy into maintaining a particular image, an image of superiority, competence, attractiveness, or emotional power. This image becomes a kind of psychological armor. It protects her from confronting feelings of inadequacy that may exist beneath the surface. Because of this, even small forms of criticism can feel deeply threatening. A simple disagreement, a piece of constructive feedback, or an honest observation may not be received as a neutral exchange of ideas. Instead, it can be experienced as an attack on her entire identity. When the ego is built upon a carefully maintained illusion of perfection, any crack in that illusion can feel catastrophic. This is why reactions to criticism often appear disproportionate. You may see defensiveness, sudden anger, dismissal of the other person's perspective, or an immediate attempt to shift blame. These responses are not always conscious strategies. More often, they are instinctive defenses designed to protect the fragile image that holds the personality together. Carl Jung often spoke about the difference between the persona, the mask we present to the world, and the deeper self that exists beneath it. When a person becomes too attached to the mask, they begin to fear anything that might expose what lies behind it. The narcissistic personality lives very close to this fear. The stronger the mask appears, the more energy must be spent protecting it. True psychological strength works in the opposite direction. It allows a person to hear criticism without collapsing, to admit imperfection without losing dignity, and to grow without feeling humiliated. And perhaps this is the most revealing truth of all. The person who must constantly defend their image has not yet discovered the quiet power of knowing who they truly are. There is another weakness that often remains hidden behind the surface dynamics we've been discussing. Behind the surface dynamics we've been discussing. And it involves the difficulty a narcissistic woman has with genuine emotional vulnerability. At the beginning of a relationship, she may appear open, engaging, even deeply interested. There can be charm, intensity, and a sense of emotional connection that feels powerful. But as the relationship moves toward deeper intimacy, something subtle often begins to change. Real intimacy requires something that the narcissistic personality finds extremely uncomfortable. It requires exposure. It requires allowing another person to see not only the strengths we proudly display, but also the insecurities, doubts, and imperfections we usually keep hidden. For someone whose identity depends heavily on maintaining a carefully controlled image, this level of openness can feel profoundly dangerous. So rather than moving deeper into emotional honesty, a defensive pattern may begin to appear. Conversations that require vulnerability are avoided. Emotional topics are redirected. Sometimes humor, distraction, or intellectual arguments are used to shift the focus away from feelings. In other cases, distance slowly grows within the relationship. The connection remains on the surface, but the deeper emotional layers are never fully explored. From a psychological perspective, this avoidance is not random. Vulnerability threatens the very structure the narcissistic personality has worked so hard to protect. If someone truly sees behind the persona, if they witness insecurity, fear, or emotional fragility, the illusion of control begins to weaken. And for the narcissistic mind, that exposure can feel like a loss of power. But here lies the paradox. The very thing that is avoided, vulnerability, is also the foundation of authentic connection. Without it, relationships remain performances rather than partnerships. Two people may share time, attention, even affection, yet the deeper bond that creates trust and emotional safety never fully forms. Carl Jung often